We've got another kind of session and a half that's going to be really unique, different, and I want to thank our panelists. I'll turn it over to Matt Wright. He's another person. I twisted his arm really hard, but I really appreciate him being here. He's local. He owns Monterey Fuel Company, and probably in some ways more meaningful for you folks, general manager of the Jet Center. So FBO here locally, and very active, and very much appreciate. Matt's going to moderate and add a few comments, but kind of try and keep us on schedule. We're going to hear the technology part, or Matt, I'll turn it over. You can tell them what to expect. I don't mean to take it away from you. And he is, yes. You'll notice in his bio, he has his JD.
Director
so,
Miller, thank you.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Carl.
Okay, out there. Everybody hear me okay? In the back? It's good. Okay, good. Well, welcome to the session. I think this may be the best, certainly most interesting session of the day, just because of the exciting nature of the technology and just the sheer number of unanswered questions that us as airport operators and stakeholders at airports have about this technology. And we're fortunate to have an extremely talented panel here today. We've got Danielle Rinsler with Uber, lead of aviation policy. Thank you for being here. Brian Learn with Uber Aviation Infrastructure. Thank you for being here. And Raja Sengupta with the UC Berkely Professor of Systems, Transportation, and Engineering. So thank you, Professor, for being here. We'll look forward to hearing your comments. Full backgrounds of their bios are in the materials that were provided to you guys, so I would encourage you to review that. You may be wondering why the FBO guy is moderating a session on eVTOL and legal ramifications for airports. What I think it really does, and it was a half-truth that she got me to come here Saturday and moderate. But, this is important stuff to FBOs, just like it's important to airports. So I've tried to be as educated as possible as an FBO manager on the latest and greatest technology. We've got great partners in the area, including Joby Aviation, who I think we've got a representative from Joby Aviation here today, Amy Gross. So thank you for coming out. But really, it speaks to the newness and uncertainty among us traditional aviation stakeholders in this exciting upcoming technology. So for the purpose of the discussion, and I think we have two presentations here. Both are about 20 minutes. So thankfully, I don't really have to do a lot today. But I'm going to presume that aside from our distinguished panel, and maybe a few of our honored guests in the audience, that most of us are here because we're not subject matter experts on the technology or the business models that may ultimately drive the commercial application of this technology. I assume that we're looking to gain some insight directly from the leaders in the technology that sit on this panel from what their visions are regarding the development, application, and rollout of the technology. So it's true, Carl had mentioned that my background is in law. I am a fourth generation attorney. Unfortunately, I was the least talented attorney in those 4 generations. But fortunately enough, I am the most talented FBO manager out of those 4 generations. So anyways, to follow in the advice I think my grandfather would have given me regarding a session like this, let's get the facts. Attorneys love facts. So let's find out what the facts are, and then we can make our own legal and business determinations on what the impact of this technology is going to be. So with that, I think I'll turn it over initially to Brian. Are you going to kick it off with your presentation. So introduce Brian Learn, Uber Aviation Infrastructure.
Okay, thanks, Matt. So, make sure this doesn't fall over on me. I think we want to start today just with a little bit of the history of Uber Elevate for those of you who are maybe not familiar with kind of what we started with and why we started, and kind of the direction that we're heading. So we want to talk here today. We're talking about flying cars. But initially, let's start and talk about cities. Got that? So right now, we would say more than half the world's population is living in cities. The UN is projecting that by 2045, over 2/3 of the world's population are going to be living in cities. So that's an approximate 6 billion people living in maybe 50 megacities around the world. And so while cities are getting denser and larger, transportation is getting worse. It's getting increasingly slow, less reliable, and more congested by the day. At Uber, we're trying to reverse this trend, and our mission is to make cities smarter, more efficient, and better places to live. And to do that, we need to radically improve urban mobility. And by radically improved urban mobility, transportation means it's fast, it's affordable, it's reliable, and it's sustainable. And it's sustainably moving people and things in cities from A to B. So when we look back through time and our history, every new major innovation and invention that's changed how we moved, it's transforming our cities and it's transforming our economies. When we think of ships and railroads and public transportation and cars, each step of the way, it's let us move people and things faster. But even with all of this change, most of our cities still look like this. There's so much more that could be done. We haven't seen transportation innovation in decades. The way we move around cities is still increasingly largely looks like it did 50 years ago, relying on 2- and 4-wheel vehicles. And there's so much more that we could be doing. And clearly the cost of that is very clear. Cities are crumbling under their own weight. There's not enough public transportation. We don't have enough subways. There's not enough bike lanes. The freeways are jammed. And even simply saying that we can just expand our highways and add more lanes, that doesn't really work, and it's difficult because when we do that, more people just come and drive. And the latent demand is there, and the latent demand fills it back up, and we're stuck. So our cities we're seeing, they're built around vehicles, not around people. So fundamentally, we're living in cities where people live in 3 dimensions. People work in 3 dimensions. Why can't we travel in 3 dimensions? So a few years ago, we started working on this problem. And we thought about how skyscrapers transformed cities and allowed residential and commercial congestion to take to the air. We want to do the same thing with transportation, and that's really what Uber Elevate is all about. So back in 2016, Uber Elevate's co-founders Nikhil Goel, the former CPO Jeff Holden, and veteran from NASA, Mark Moore, got together and they published a white paper around all of this. Mark spent about 32 years at NASA and working on this problem very specifically. We put the paper together really to envision how do we do this? How do we fast forward to a world of on-demand urban air transportation? Push a button and get a flight. So it started with this vision. And I think we've all experienced Bay Area traffic, LA traffic, and just stuck in complete gridlock. I've had that feeling of where we wish that we could just sprout wings, fly over all of it directly to our destination, and it's over with. And we take a look at this route, very simply, LAX to the Staples Center. This is a route that tens of thousands of people take every week. It's about 1.5 hours by car. That's less than an 8-minute flight. So, and we think that we can do that, complete that, in under 30 minutes from door to door. And so that's kind of the vision. That was the initial vision, and that's where we started from. And then we asked ourselves, how are we going to make this possible, right? And so the easy answer initially was helicopters, right? Why not just buy 1,000 helicopters, deploy them to cities around the country, throw them on the app, make them available for our riders, and away we go. And when we thought about it really quickly, the answer came back, we can't do that. And it's, I'm sure we're all familiar, but there's three really easy answers as to why we can't do that. One is noise. Helicopters are loud, exorbitantly loud, and there's many cities that have banned their commercial use altogether. Two, they're really just not safe enough for our application when we think about our scale of our implementation. They have a number, hundreds of parts of what we call single fault parts, whereas if at any point during a flight a single part fails, we could be in serious trouble in the air. And then thirdly is cost. So the maintenance required for all of these single fault parts is far too excessive, and it's just not viable. So today we think about riding in a helicopter. It's really, frankly, reserved for the elite, and it's not something we can scale to millions of people around the world. So we started from scratch. Mark Moore, working through a number of things while at NASA, was working through distributed electric propulsion, and that's where we envisioned our very own vehicle. So what you're seeing, it's not a helicopter. This is the initial thoughts around an eVTOL. So electric vertical takeoff and landing. It's a drone that meets a fixed wing airplane. So instead of a large rotor, we have several smaller rotors, and it takes off vertically, just like a helicopter. So we used our data here to kind of define an economic mission for this vehicle. And then we asked ourselves, if we were to design the perfect aircraft for urban air mobility, what would it look like and how would it perform based on some very simple specifications: speed, payload, range. And this is what we need to know to design really any aircraft. Speed, they need to go fast in order to get passengers to their destination faster than they can in a ground-based vehicle. So that's about 150 miles an hour. Payload, we need 4 seats plus a pilot, and that is so we can use kind of the Uber pool technology and batch riders together and fill the vehicles. And range, about 60 miles. And 60 miles, we know from our data, covers the vast majority of Uber riders today. But that's not it. They need to be sustainable. They need to be 100% all electric. They can be, and they will be, utilizing battery technology that's available today. They need to be quiet. So using the distributed electrical propulsion, which is the multiple smaller rotors, rather than one single rotor, it allows the tips of these rotors to spin significantly slower, thus reducing the sound. And so in some of the early analysis, the simplified comparative sound levels experienced about 15 decibels quieter than existing helicopters. Finally, safety. Safety is in the heart of everything that we do at Uber. And these vehicles need to be something that our millions of riders around the world need to trust. And so using the distributed electrical propulsion, each of the rotors are independent, meaning if one or two of them fail during the flight, the onboard software can take over and compensate, and the vehicle can still travel and land safely. And so we're working on this in 2 ways. On the left, you see the electric aircraft, connected skyports. My slide is not coming up, but there's a beautiful rendering of a skyport there. And this is where our partners come into play. So we're working with some of the top OEMs in the industry, plus real estate developers in the world who are building or who are going to be building these capital-intensive assets for us. And then on the right, we're working on the software in-house, and that is the app plus the Elevate Cloud services, and those are going to be the operations that are going to power the network. So who are we working with? So here's 4 of legendary companies here that we started with: Embraer Air, Bell Helicopter, Aurora Flight Sciences, and Pipistrel. Some of the pioneers and leaders in the vertical lift electrical aviation. Each of them signed up with us and said, we're going to build an aircraft for Uber. We're going to design it around the specifications that I just spoke about, and they're doing that. And what happened over the next 3 years, and this was from 2016 up until 2019, was really something truly remarkable. Not only did these companies start designing and building these aircraft, not only did they make it an important part of their company mission, they started to evolve their identities. They all updated their logos, they changed their missions, and this became the future of their companies. So Embraer became Embraer X for new urban air technologies. Bell Helicopters dropped helicopters altogether. Aurora Flight Sciences was acquired by Boeing, as Boeing wanted an inlet into the industry. And Pipistrel became Pipistrel Vertical Solutions. While that was also happening, more companies joined the party. And so today Uber has 8 partners that you see here on the screen, and all of them are designing and building and certifying that, and one day soon will be manufacturing the aircraft that all of us are going to be riding. And what's more remarkable, PitchBook at the end of the year, last year, wrote an article that of all the known companies in the space currently, and as of 4 weeks ago, 2 of these companies were not publicly known, that funding in the eVTOL space was about $493 million. So while that's a lot of money, with the addition of our 2 most recent announced partners, Joby Aviation and Hyundai, that number is 5x'd. And we're only 4 weeks into the year. And so we're only getting started. So we're talking now that within the space, there's over $2.5 billion invested into the eVTOL developments. So talk quickly about Joby here. Joby Aviation, one of our recent partnership announcements. They're currently building a manufacturing testing facilities just 10 miles from here, a local, wonderful success story that we love. And was founded by JoBen Bivert in 2009, the same year that Uber was founded. And while Uber was growing in the market over the last 10 years, JoBen was creating this. Recently, JoBen announced an exciting partnership with Toyota, and Toyota was leading their Series C investment recently of over $500 million. And we see this as really important. It's important for the money, but it's more important because we see major automotive manufacturers stepping in to join forces in the eVTOL manufacturing. And when we think about these manufacturers, Toyota and Hyundai, they have the expertise in manufacturing massive volumes of safe, reliable, and well-produced vehicles. And this is what we need because we're talking about manufacturing aircraft less like aircraft and more like automobiles. And this is what the automotive manufacturers are going to bring to the industry. And so while all this is happening, and what's equally as exciting, recently Jay Merkel came out and announced or that there are 6 OEMs in the space. Currently, they're already well along their way in their type certification with vehicles. And so this is super exciting for Uber's vision, or that the FAA is also behind and supporting kind of the vision of deploying thousands of these vehicles and aircrafts across cities globally. So how do we do this? When we think of multimodal aerial ride sharing, we can't take off and land from your backyard. The vehicles are too large. So what's important to remember, it's a form of transportation, it's multimodal. We batch our riders together into a single vehicle. We fly them to another node within the city, and then when they land, they get out, and there's a vehicle waiting for them to take them to their final destination. It's multimodal ride sharing. So we take off and land from skyports, nodes within the cities. This is Los Angeles. And what we do is we take our rider data about how people move about the cities, and we condense that down, and we ask if we, too far. And so we ask if we were to put Skyport in the most opportune areas of the city, where is that going to be within the urban core, and how are we going to do it? So we start working with some of the best partners in the world that will design and build our Skyports across the cities. They're going to start pretty simple. This here is a very early and simple, cartoonish rendering, if you will, of our first Skyport. But what's important to recognize here is that we are re-leveraging existing infrastructure. Tops of buildings, tops of parking garages, or empty plots of land. And right now, at this point, these are pieces of property and plots of land that are still quite affordable. Over time, as the technology gets better and we start to scale and we start to think about building mega skyports and mega transportation nodes that can handle thousands of passengers an hour. So we'll have skyports for takeoff and landing. And these skyports will be connected with a dynamic skylane, which integrates seamlessly within existing commercial air traffic. So this is a pretty gargantuan problem, and we understand that. And the current air traffic system is handling about 43,000 flights a day with 5,000 aircraft over the country. Was it 4 million square miles? So what we're talking about coordinating at least the same amount of aircraft and flights, but within a single city like LA. So that's a 10,000-fold increase in flight density. So we're working very closely with NASA and FAA to build this new form of digital aircraft management and control. And so how does it all come together? So we mentioned that helicopters were expensive, and we see that as about $10 per passenger mile. And when eVTOL launches, the technology launches, saying that the helicopters are $10 a passenger mile. When eVTOL launching, we're already going to cut about a third of that cost. We're going to say that eVTOLs are coming in around an UberX price point initially. And then as we continue to scale and increase the utilization and the load factor of the aircraft and making sure that we're batching all the riders into single vehicles, we can bring that down. And ultimately, with autonomy, we'll get down to about 50 cents per passenger mile. So when you think about that, 50 cents per passenger mile is the ultimate goal. AAA currently defines the cost of operating a car ownership is 50 cents a passenger mile. So now it's cheaper to fly to work than it is to drive or own a vehicle. And that's where we're heading. So we're already testing the urban aerial ride-sharing technology today. So this is New York. And this is one of the most congested routes that we see. This is from JFK Airport to Manhattan. So it's a drive, if any of you have taken it, usually can take about 2 hours, no matter what time of day you're leaving the airport or trying to get to the airport. From Manhattan to JFK or back, it's an 8-minute flight. So we're serving this today. We launched Ubercopter last year in July. So yes, we're using a helicopter. But what's important, see if this catches up. What's important is that we're already learning, and we're already figuring out how to deliver amazing customer experiences. We're already trying to figure out how to integrate into the existing fabric of one of the world's largest cities. And we're already transporting large numbers of passengers. We're figuring out how to scale this awesome customer experience, how to work with operators, how to work with aviation providers, the FAA, and how to do it safely. We can figure out all the other supplementary technologies that we need to build over the next decade so that we can do this. So we can launch in 2023. We'll be launching in Los Angeles, Dallas, and Melbourne. Each of these cities are incredibly important to us, and they're incredibly important to Uber, where we already have existing relationships. And so this is where we're going to start to roll out Uber Air. Just 3 short years in technology, and it's much closer than we all think. Ultimately, we think that major cities all around the world are going to point to the first Uber Air product, and they're going to say, hey, we need that. We need a way to transport people from A to B, and we need to do it without building new roads, and need to do it in a way that's fast and helps increase the productivity of our cities. So when we put it all together, this is where we're heading. Uber is growing into a platform for every way and everything that we move, and Elevate is our biggest and boldest bet yet. And a vision for dense networks, thousands of flying cars, speeding people across through your cities every day, extending Uber's unprecedented scale into the sky. And this is what it'll look like. if it will play. Maybe not. There it goes. There you go.
I knew these were always going to be tough acts to follow. What do I say after that? Pretty amazing technology, right? And yeah, you guys are sticking around for session 2, right? Or are you not sticking around for session 2 for the? We've got another presentation that's about 20 minutes in length too, right? So I think if we start Q&A now, and I'm sure I wrote down about 10 questions myself, we wouldn't get through me before we get to the next presentation. So I think what I'd like to do is let's hold on to your questions, because Raja's presentation may address some of those questions, and it may raise even more questions. So let's move on to Raja's presentation. So again, Raja, UC Berkely, professor.
Yes.
Expert.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. That was visionary. That was uplifting. And I think to handle that presentation, we need a multi-core GPU machine, so it would load properly. I look at this vision, I'm a guy who started doing drones in 1998 when nobody was interested in it. And just like the computing technology had difficulty keeping up with the vision, I think we'll have to put much of our world on steroids to keep up with this vision. And that is what I hope and try to do. So with that, it's called Building the UAM Value Proposition. Vishwanath here is one of the people who's worked with me on this. He's here, he's got his PhD with me. Now he works at NASA. We were working on conflict detection and resolution algorithms for this stuff. But today I'm going to talk about something else. So there's a clicker here, right? So, okay. Turn it around, right? All right. So the urban mobility landscape, there are about 4 million jobs in the Bay Area. If I take one job per commute, one commute per job, I get about 4 million jobs, and you can see the breakup there, right? How many go by automobile? About 3 million of them. Transit, about 500,000, and the rest is work from home, and then there are smaller modes, walking, cycling, etc., right? So this is actually, I think, one of Uber's pictures, and we have Dallas, Melbourne, and LA on there correctly. And if we take a fleet of, I believe, 1,000 4-seater aircraft, I think we assume 4-seater here instead of 2-seater, and 3 trips an hour for 10 hours, we would move about 40,000 people a day in the region, right? That is 1% of the urban mobility landscape. The urban mobility landscape is a very big landscape. It's an order of magnitude, several orders of magnitude bigger in some measures, not by all measures, than the aviation landscape, right? So Boeing and Airbus produce a few hundred aircraft a year. I think Toyota does about 25 million aircraft a year, right? So it's a big operation. And I was hoping to shock you by saying that when you erect a building the size of Grand Central Station and move 1% of the people, you will attract the attention of the 99%, and then you get problems like this. And I was hoping to scare you with this. But what I've learned sitting here is that I thought I would scare you with this, but you scared me. Because you showed me that even when you build an airport that moves the 90%, you still fight the 99%. They tell you, oh, I love the airport, I want to use it, it flies me on vacation, but I'm still going to, ask for a curfew hour, right? Talk about shooting yourself in the foot. So, it's been interesting. This, by the way, the second time that I've come to this meeting. The first time I came to this meeting was because of a person called Todd McNamee. Does anyone here know him? I'm sure you remember him well. He was a very, very wonderful man. And he got me, very, very interested in your association. I myself, this is where I come from, this is a drone. And it's actually flying an unmanned air vehicle, and it's flying, you saw this, it's got a military pilot with over 1,000 hours of flight experience. It's flying in controlled airspace, under Air Traffic Control Authority, autonomously, searching for an oil spill, right, that the European Maritime Safety Agency wants to collect evidence about because we have simulated this with popcorn. That's not real oil. It's 100 kilos of popcorn. And you can look at me very, very happy. You can see me there looking very, very happy. And this is another thing that I learned being here. I'm never going to call myself a drone guy again. I'm going to be an unmanned air vehicle guy. Because you guys go, here comes another drone guy. He doesn't care about the airports. He doesn't care about the pilots. He doesn't care about FAA Part 195.1, 1.1, 1.1.1. He doesn't care about any of it, right? But you see, I'm a very different kind of guy. So what I started thinking, because I love this stuff, right? And now urban air mobility is happening. And, once, Vishwanath started working at NASA, I started thinking about this and getting familiar with it. And I feel we have to build an urban value proposition. Because urban air mobility has to serve urban mobility, right? And that is its vision, as Brian pointed out. So what is the urban value proposition, right? So, who is UAM for, right? If it's this 1%, who is this 1%? And sometimes, of course, if you're moving the bankers around, right, and you want special things, you can get into trouble. But there's certain kinds of like this nation has 4 million plus supercommuters, right, who take more than 90 minutes to commute. There's a strong correlation between poverty and commute length. So if people can get food stamps, why can't they get UAM stamps, right? I don't know. I mean, or maybe why can't this be some form of transit for the disabled? Paratransit, right? So there are a variety of ways to think about it. And, one of the thoughts that occurred to me is, one of the marvelous things about, this company. So practically every shared transportation form, whether it's the train or the bus, makes a demand upon the public exchequer, right, upon my taxes. Now, this is a company that aspires to have a business model for shared transportation that will run without making a claim upon my taxes, right? And I've learned today there are two kinds of arrogance, actually. There's arrogance, and then there's Uber-like arrogance. So, talk about, run shared transportation without my taxes? Uber-like arrogance, right? But I'm sure in this, in this era of Donald Trump, we should give him a big pat on the back for that. So who is this for, right? And I want us to think about it imaginatively, because not all transportation is to run as a for-profit business. If you have equity considerations, then you're entitled to certain kinds of other consideration. What does it mean to cities, metropolitan planning organizations, in terms of land use, revenue, all terms that you seem extremely familiar with, right? When coming from the technology world, in those circles, they don't talk about any of these things, cities and MPOs, right? But that's one of the wonderful things about being here. Noise pollution, which I've been hearing a lot about, more or less road traffic, where you have these vertiports. They'll reduce congestion, they'll increase congestion. All this needs to be figured out. So at Berkeley, what we're about now is building a multimodal simulation and analytics platform that can take this on. And we started on this. We've taken a Bay Area road network, ingested it in, and how do I play this? It's playing. Right, and this is origin destination data from the San Francisco County Transit Authority, right? And this is 177,000 east to west trips, right? And so we're simulating at regional scale, right? And we want to take the links and put it into this model and model it so we can understand the regional travel impacts, right? So if Brian's saying that, this is going to revolutionize a city, right? So if I go to a city and say I want space, I want a new conversation. See, because one of the difficulties we're facing with this urban air mobility is that the world of aviation and the world of urban planning ignore each other, except when it comes to an airport. Guys like me, if I go to the urban mobility guys, they say we don't do aviation. And if I go to the aviation guys, right, like Mr. McClarty here, he says, I don't do urban mobility. I do inter-urban mobility. I have a policy, I'm a field office, I do implementation. I can do inter-urban mobility, but not urban mobility, right? And I don't see how something that has so much impact on the city, positive in a revolutionary way, as Brian has argued, right, and certain negative things, I'm sure, can go ahead without constructing a new conversation, just like the airport conversation between the planners and the aviators, right? So hence this idea. We have to do UAM network modeling, right? Here we did some, k-means clustering analysis and took like sort of a hub vertiport model, right? Instead of this ubiquitous vertiport model where there are many buildings, we said, what if we have a hub model, right? We can model other kinds of things. And then we started looking at this. What are sort of the trip time impacts in the Bay Area? And this is a very first cut analysis. And is there a pointer here? The red one? There we go, right? So here you can see that if I'm looking at the travel time by road, there's this tail, right? And once I move people from home to vertiport by road, vertiport to vertiport by air, and vertiport to destination again by road, this tail out here has vanished. It's over here, right? Here, there's also a negative side that has come out there actually in terms of trip time savings, because in this first cut analysis, we looked at the effect of putting everybody into the air. Right? But you can still see, even if you do that, there's 700,000 hours of daily travel time saving in a region like the Bay Area, right? And we're just getting started on trying to understand these things. Because, so this was exactly that idea. Not if we, let's not just look at the 1% who might do, Uber Black or Uber Lux or something. But what if we did this at scale? Right, and really looked at impacting the region. So that's one kind of work we're doing, building up this multimodal analysis and simulation platform. The other thing that I want to point out is, we're engineers, we build things and design things. So I said, other than this, how do we, look at things in some very precise way, come to grips with the technology and what it means? So big things are built in small steps, and we decided to take a case study approach, right? And so one of the things that's going on is UC Berkely is building a 36-acre campus at NASA Ames. And Berkeley owns 170 acres of property on the waterfront, about 6 miles from campus. So we said, what if we start the world's first urban air shuttle? And this is the case study that we're working on. So, because the big advantage is that both are on the water. So we'd be flying over the water, right? And so then, we looked at vertiport location, in these areas, where can we locate vertiports, et cetera, on the two properties. That's one thing we're looking at. These are small vertiports, not the big hub type things, right? And then the motivation, of course, is the misery today, which is the 90-minute commute from Berkeley to Mountain View, which Vishwanath here does every day. And so he has a great deal of enthusiasm for this study. The air corridor, instead of 50 miles, would be 38 miles. But it all turns out to be a little more complicated than this because of all the controlled airspace. And actually, if you go and look at this carefully, there's this tiny little corridor actually between SFO and Oakland that, you can try and route all this stuff without going through the Class B airspace, right? And I can see that the Bay Area's, urban bottleneck corridor is going to be that one. That's the one that every Uber elevator is going to want to share, right? Because that's probably the only way to get through. And so, and then, we look at the technology and we say, we'll do some trajectory design, et cetera. And we look at aircraft. And here we did use our assumptions are different from actually the Uber Elevate model. We followed, some data that we got from Airbus about its Vahana. And then we used a hypothetical 6-seater model that was developed by Wayne Johnson at NASA Ames. And, so it has different lift-to-drag ratios, et cetera. And then, now we start to say, okay, we're doing this case study, so who are our different stakeholders? And what are the value propositions to the stakeholders? So we said, okay, how many people would I have to move on a 36-acre campus, right? So I looked at the Apple campus, 175 acres, 12,000 people, and said 36 acres, 2,500 people, 2,400 people. And so if I'm moving, let's say, if I'm using 2-seater Vahanas, right, then in 3 hours, right, I would move 720 people per commute, assuming one takeoff every, I think that's on the next slide, right? I'll give you the number again, and with the 6-seater, it would be 2160. So hopefully the stakeholder is happy, at least in the sense it can be done, right? Though the Dean of Capital Projects, who actually builds all the stuff and would do this, immediately said, how does it compare to a ferry, right? So that's what I mean by saying urban air mobility has to make its value proposition on the urban mobility landscape. Right, so when you talk about this, you have to compete with the Toyota Prius, right? You have to compete with the ferry. And I think what we did is we said, okay, there are two per minute, right? Takeoffs and landings 2 per minute, trip time of 18 minutes, 150 miles per hour, aircraft in corridor 36, miles in train separation 1.25, which looks really good if UC Berkeley are the only people using that little corridor between SFO and Oakland, right? I got the whole thing to myself, right? And that's good enough for wake vortex separation and all of that, right? And, well, to the FAA, of course, I think they would call it a headache, right, this whole thing. Now, here's the interesting thing, right? Brian said that, there are 3 reasons you can't use a helicopter, right? One was, I think, failure in parts. One was maintenance. And there was a third one, the noise, right? Now, being at Berkeley, right, and being as we are, sort of at the vanguard of the very left environmental consciousness movement, if the chancellor tried to fly me, the problem would be on this energy thing. I don't know if, do you have the Robinson helicopter on your wish? You don't, right? Well, the Robinson, so urban air, if we take one of these new aircraft, flying me from Berkeley to Mountain View would take about 50 kilowatt hour, right? Or 35 kilowatt hour. 35 kilowatt hour. It's 50 kilowatt hour in your 30 mpg gasoline sedan. So it beats that. It won't beat an electric car. It's 25 kilowatt hour in an electric car. But on a Robinson helicopter, oh God, I didn't want to show you that horrible mass of red. That's all the research I sweep under the carpet. Right? So on the Robinson helicopter, it'll be 250 kilowatt hour, 5 times. If the chancellor tried to fly me, she'd have a riot at her door. Right? The students will all go and riot and tell her she's an eco-criminal, right? But when it's for 50 and 35 and 25, you're in the ballpark. And 90 minutes versus 20 minutes matters, right? So, okay, here's another headache. So we did the math. If everybody's moving one direction in a commute, so all the aircraft go there and they wait there till the evening commute, I would be asking NASA Ames for enough space to park 360 aircraft, or 120 to 360 aircraft, depending on what you use it. Now that is pretty substantive, firstly, as capital stock, right? It's pretty substantial, which maybe says we can't really do something like this. UC Berkeley has to reach an agreement with Uber Elevate, right? Because we cannot afford to have a stock of like 360 aircraft just sitting there for us. So there are various things like this. Okay, so I'm just going to conclude, right, with another one of these inspirational videos, which I'm not going to say anything about because, Brian really did the job. This is like nothing. But I just want you to bear with this, in spite of the beautiful stuff you've seen, until one place, where I'm going to pause it, I hope. Here. Stop it. Cole, pause it. The previous bit. Did you see that maze of freeways? Did you see the maze of freeways? So here's what Brian says means to me. There is a phrase in the English language. It's called the wrong side of the tracks. Did you grow up on the right side of the tracks or the wrong side of the tracks? It entered the American vocabulary in the railway era. But freeways also slice cities, right? This is how we've kept our cities moving. I don't think a vertiport does that, right? To me, that's why it sort of looks transformational, right? The sociological divides that have sliced our cities, right? And maybe there's a new way of doing things, yeah? And so maybe the last thought I want to leave you with is that in the life of many a 20th century city, there came a time when it was no longer possible to move people over the ground, right? In London, this happened as early as 1863, which is when the London Underground got going, right? And every city reached this point where it had to go under. Even the Bay Area has built BART, right? That it had to go under. Now, here's sort of my way of what I would like to say to our urban mobility community. Why have we not opened our skies, the great skies of our cities? Our cities have sprawled, and we have crawled on its freeways, right? Can we open the skies? So this is, sort of the promise and the dream, the sense in which I share or interpret Brian's dream. So I'll just stop there. And
Well, my head is about to explode. I don't know about you all, but I feel awful for driving my Sierra 1500 full-size truck. But I think that has raised even more questions in the minds of many of the folks sitting in this audience who, of course, live, work, have dedicated their careers and lives to airports, right? And airport infrastructure and air transportation. And that's why this session, I think, is so timely and so important, because this is a disruptive technology to airport operators, right? It's not, I don't know if disruptive is the right word, complementary. There's a word. There's a word. Some of you may say disruptive. Some of you may say, man, that's some opportunity. And I think that's going to be the discussion in the next session, and I appreciate you agreeing to stick around and answer these 500 questions you're about to be bombarded with from a bunch of airport attorneys. So I think, Chris, should we take our break a few minutes early so we can come back maybe a few minutes early and
Sure.
launch our
Does
question?
Amy want to weigh in now, or when we come
Amy?
back? And Danielle, do you have comments
Yeah.
a little bit?
If you want. I mean, I was going to say a couple things. Just, I think, so I'm Danielle Rinser, and I am now with Uber as the head of aviation policy, but I hail from the airport industry and from the Federal Aviation Administration. So I think we may have lost Mark and Jim in the course of the day, unless they're still here and I just don't see them. But I think there's a lot of, I think the preceding sessions, just thinking about all the issues that this industry has dealt with for a long time, are very relevant. Sorry to put you on the spot. But I will say I was here in my capacity at FAA and DOT in August, I think, with Marianne and Chris at Monterey, and got a great tour of the airport. And I was at that point working on infrastructure issues and thinking about how can we, in my previous capacity, how can we help finance airport infrastructure in this country and do a better job where we've got shortfalls in funding sources, both through the Airport Improvement Program, the Passenger Facility Charge Program. And in months preceding that visit, I had been thinking about kind of my own kind of career within FAA, and I had worked, maybe stepping back, I'd worked in the Office of Airports as the manager, as both assistant manager and acting manager for a long time of the airport planning and environmental division. So for the airport folks in the room who work with airport planners around the country and with environmental protection specialists, I managed a team of folks at headquarters that developed a lot of the trying to update the Part 150 guidance, the airport land use compatibility guidance, and really developing standards for airports, airport master planning standards, and so forth, and dealing with a lot of the issues that we're now dealing with out of, in my time there, I was working on the 2012 reauthorization, so now folks are working on addressing some of the things in the latest FAA reauthorization. But I thought about, well, what would it, I got invited to speak on a panel about some emerging technologies. I had been working, sitting on a drone, the Unmanned Aircraft System Rulemaking Committee for about 5 years. So I had some background in kind of thinking. I was the airport's representative on this rulemaking committee for a long time. So I was sort of representing airport interests and thinking about what are the all the things that we've sort of touched on today, and I think some of the comments about how do we address airspace integration, what's coming, a lot of the concerns, and so a friend invited me to speak on a panel at the World Bank, and then I was on this panel with this guy, and I was fascinated just at the discussions about kind of what's coming in the industry. So. Anyhow, to make a long story short, Marianne, a couple months later, I attended Uber Elevate on behalf of FAA and US DOT. And Brian didn't have pictures of it, but Uber has done over the last 3 years these summits called the Elevate Summit, and invited folks from industry. And it started very small, but last June summit in DC, did anybody attend the summit from this group? We'll have to get this group an invitation to a future summit. Millie from Uber. But I attended just in my capacity, not really thinking much of it. And I was sort of blown away, and I was very kind of walking into it skeptical of kind of Uber's plans and thinking. And I walked out thinking, wow, there's a lot of investment happening. And just kind of for the month after this summit, all I could do was sort of think about how transformative this would be for the industry and all the planning and community. I'm a planner by training, so I started in this. I sort of fell into aviation planning very early in my career. And anyhow, for those of you who know Marianne, she's a connector. She connects people in the community, and so. When I came out in my other capacity to visit Monterey, she said, "Hey, there's some," and she knew I was interested in emerging technologies and some of this. She introduced me to Amy, so a fellow planner, and she can introduce herself. But so this is a long introduction just to say there's a lot of work ahead. There's a lot of policy issues ahead, I think, for this industry. It is clearly has. I've only been at Uber for about a month. I can tell you that there are a lot of they're thinking about kind of how to do the right thing from a policy standpoint and working with communities where they're going to be launching service. There's a heavy focus on obviously on community acceptance, like how do we start using low altitude airspace in a way that is going to be accepted by the community. It's going to be disruptive in some ways, but also there's a real strategic sort of thinking around how do we build stakeholder support for the type of service that we're intending to do. So I can answer questions as we go along, but I think there's a real focus on working with the FAA. We've already started discussions on noise metrics, so electric aircraft sound very different, right? I don't know if you got it from Brian's video, but and Amy can talk to it, but what is the noise signature of these aircraft? How do people perceive that noise? And noise is only one piece of the equation, right? So noise reflects what is it? There's some statistic. It's if the noise folks is the Kaufman folks still here, it's like 30%, right? 18 to 30%. You can probably know the studies better than I do. So a lot of it is going to be the visual impact of these low altitude aircraft. And just the feeling and the sensing, that folks are experiencing as they see these aircraft. So I think there's a lot to talk about in the policy space with regard to airspace and airspace management But anyhow, just as a way to sort of like the legal ramifications, I think a lot of the considerations are around policy and about city planning and how do we engage city and community planners, our metropolitan planning organizations, all the folks that do airport land use compatibility planning should be really interested in what the future is in terms of urban air mobility. So.
Thank you. That's okay. That's okay. This is so fun. This is so much fun. I thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me here. Woo! This is what we say at Joby. We're so excited. We're so excited to partner with Uber or to work with Uber and Toyota. I think just talking about these issues are things that we talk about constantly and stay up at night thinking about in terms of how do we get to the next step of what does the mobility look like? I think in terms of what Joby's working on is the aircraft mostly. I mean, that's what we're developing. And I think the number one thing that we think about is safety. I mean, that's the very first piece, safety. And then noise. So it's really exciting. We're hoping to do more things this year. I'm trying to think what else.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting. I think the partnership with Joby is really significant. One of the things that Brian didn't mention, but as we launch and go to scale, I think this is just something from it's a new industry, right? So as we launch and go to scale, I think the partnerships that the aircraft manufacturers have with the automobile manufacturing is really interesting, and the idea that you could start mass producing aircraft is really, I think, going to change. It's going to really shape how Uber launches service, and whether if we only have a few aircraft, it's going to be very hard to grow to scale. It might be scary to look at some of the future concepts or the simulations that we have, but I think the part of the partnerships, because Uber is not building vehicles, so we're not going to be a manufacturer. We're relying on our partners like Joby, who are developing these aircraft to our design specifications, which are really tailored for a very specific market. So I think that's important.
And I think it'll be interesting to see how we move forward in the type certification, because that's a really big process that we're starting to work on now, and working with FAA and talking with FAA on how do we get this vehicle certified. I mean, it's not an aircraft, it's not a helicopter. So that's a piece that we have a lot of folks working right now just on type certification, and I think over the next few years, that's really where the focus will be, so we can get these out to cities and used in the main frame of people's lives. Our goal is to save 1 billion people an hour a day. It's a dream. Our CEO, Joby Aviation, who's amazing, and he says it's an audacious dream, but we can do it. We're so excited. But it's going to take this working together, whether you're working with your local airports, your local ADO, cities. It really needs, that conversation needs to happen, and it needs to happen in a space where there's not just, I work somewhere where it's mostly aerospace engineers, amazing scientists that are creating things that are amazing, but the other piece to that is they also don't have a lot of perspective sometimes on what it takes to get something to market, to be in the world that makes it accessible for everyone. It's interesting to work with people. I come from another side. I worked for the government. I worked for the county of Santa Cruz for 15 years. So I'm used to sort of working through process, regulations, and getting things done, public opinion, public hearings, the whole thing. And it's interesting because we don't move necessarily at light speed like the private sector does. So, it's a process, and it gets done, but it's definitely a process. So that's why I think it's really important that we start these conversations. And you were saying, like, how does this work? How do we, you bring up an amazing point. It's just, how do we transform this from this great idea, and we're getting the technology, and we have wonderful partners, and working with FAA to delivering this. And these conversations need to happen, and I think that's our next big chunk for sure.
Matt, what I would suggest is it's a good point to transition. They brought cookies in.
We've got
And
cookies.
as you were starting to say, we have about a half an hour, 40 minutes, but about a half an hour left. Why don't we take 5 minutes, get cookies, just stand for a minute, bathroom break if you need it, and then you can reconvene, and maybe Bernadette can join you and start asking the questions. I kind of am looking at this next half an hour or so almost as a focus group for these folks. Of you airport folks, airport attorneys, what are the policy considerations? What are the landmines? You know, just kind of have a discussion that you can kind of take care of. But let's just 5 minutes. It's a short break, but enough to get a cookie or two.